Chapter 1. The Card Aisle. Barry Evans remembered he'd forgotten a Father's Day card while stopped at a red light behind a delivery van advertising same-day balloon arrangements. The realization landed in his chest with an irritating weight, the way forgotten things always did. Not urgent enough to panic, but sharp enough to nag. He was 37 years old, married, and the father of 2 children who believed forgetting anything important was a moral failing. His son, 11 and already committed to fairness as a personal ideology, would say, "You wouldn't forget Mom's card." His daughter, 7 and unburdened by tact, would simply say, "That's sad." Barry signaled right and pulled into the small specialty shop on Main Street, the one that smelled like paper and lavender and always played music that suggested feelings should be discussed at a reasonable volume. He stood in the aisle marked for Dad longer than necessary, holding cards with jokes about grills, ties, and golf, none of which applied. His father did not grill, wear ties, or golf. His father read history books, walked everywhere, and fixed broken things without announcing it. Eventually, Barry chose a simple card. No punchline, no glitter, just a line about gratitude written in a font that didn't shout. That night, after dinner, homework negotiations, and the elaborate ritual his daughter required before sleep, Barry sat at the kitchen table alone. The house had entered its rare quiet hour, the one where appliances hummed like they were guarding secrets and the streetlights cast thoughtful shadows through the window. He opened the card and uncapped a pen. "Dad," he wrote, then stopped. He stared at the blank space beneath the word and waited for something recent to surface. A memory from the past year. A shared moment. A conversation longer than 10 minutes that didn't involve logistics or weather. Nothing came. Barry leaned back in the chair, the realization settling more heavily now. He had memories, of course, weekends at his dad's apartment, the smell of cheap coffee and old books, the way his father always let him win at board games but never made it obvious. He remembered the court-ordered visits, the precise handoffs in parking lots, the way his dad tried to compress a month's worth of parenting into 2 weekends. But those memories were old, dusty at the edges. He tried to remember the last time he'd really been present with his father. Not a phone call, not a holiday meal surrounded by other people. Just time. He couldn't. Barry closed the card. The divorce had happened when he was in 2nd grade. He remembered the classroom more than the house they'd lived in, the smell of crayons, the feel of the carpet under his knees during reading time. Life before the divorce felt like something he'd been told about rather than lived. Afterward, his father became a part-time presence, officially important but practically distant. Barry had hated it. He knew his dad had hated it too. But the system, with its calm paperwork and tidy rulings, had decided this was sufficient. Enough to remind you there was another parent. Not enough to let you forget. His mother had done her best. She worked constantly. So did his father. There was no safety net, no grandparents swooping in to soften the edges. Just 2 tired adults doing what they thought was necessary. Years later, Barry had overheard his mother admit, half laughing, half drunk, that divorcing his dad might have been a mistake. She'd said it like a confession that expected absolution. Too little, too late. When Barry had finally asked his father why they divorced, he'd braced himself for something dramatic. Infidelity, cruelty, secrets. Instead, his father had said simply, "She wasn't happy. That was it. No betrayal. No catastrophe. Just dissatisfaction nurtured by friends who believed happiness was always somewhere else." Those same friends were now still single, still disappointed, still blaming men for failing to become someone different. Barry loved his mother. He just didn't take her advice on relationships. The data didn't support it. Helen, his wife, came from a different world. Her parents were still married, still polite to each other, still inexplicably cheerful after decades together. They treated Barry like a son, not a guest. Their stability had once felt alien to him, like a foreign language he was expected to understand instinctively. He did understand it now, or at least he tried to. Barry looked down at the card again, suddenly felt inadequate, performative. He thought about his children, about what they would learn from what he modeled, about whether they would grow up believing fathers were optional, replaceable, easy to drift away from. That thought tightened something in his chest. He picked up his phone and opened a blank message to his father. Stared at it, closed it, opened it again. What if instead of a card, he thought, "I offered time"? The idea startled him with its simplicity. When Helen came into the kitchen, barefoot and thoughtful, Barry was still sitting there, the card unopened, the pen uncapped. "You look like you're negotiating with inanimate objects," she said gently. "I forgot to buy my dad a card," Barry said. Helen smiled. "You did not. I watched you put it on the counter. I forgot what to write." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. "That happens when you care." Barry exhaled. "I don't want to send him something empty." Helen tilted her head. "So don't." He looked at her then, really looked. The steadiness, the patience, the way she listened without fixing unless asked. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "about asking him to go camping with us." Helen blinked. "Camping? With the kids? For the weekend? And your dad?" "Yes." She considered this, not dismissive, not immediately enthusiastic either. "Why now?" "Because I don't want to wake up in 10 years and realize my kids only know me in fragments," Barry said. And because I think I owe him more than a card. Helen reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then ask him. Barry smiled, a little uncertain, but lighter. He picked up the pen again, not to write in the card, but to jot down dates, possibilities. The card remained blank. And for the first time that evening, that felt like the right beginning. Chapter 2. The suggestion. Barry waited until Sunday afternoon to call his father. Not because he thought the timing mattered, but because he needed the morning to rehearse the conversation without actually rehearsing it. He discovered early in life that rehearsed conversations never survived contact with the real thing. He stepped out onto the back porch with his phone, the smell of cut grass drifting over from a neighbor's yard. Helen was inside refereeing a dispute about screen time that had somehow escalated into a philosophical debate about fairness. Barry closed the door quietly, grateful and faintly guilty. The phone rang 4 times before his father answered. "Hey Bear," his dad said. He'd never stopped using the nickname, though Barry had stopped being small enough to deserve it decades ago. "Hey Dad." There was a pause, not awkward exactly but careful. The pause of 2 people who loved each other and didn't quite know where to set their feet. "What's up?" his father asked. Barry took a breath. "I realized I forgot to get you a Father's Day card." His dad chuckled. "You don't need to." "I know." Barry cut in gently. "That's not actually why I'm calling." Another pause. Longer this time. "I was thinking," Barry continued, "instead of a card, maybe we could do something together. All of us." "All of us," his father repeated, thoughtful. "Camping," Barry said, before he could second-guess himself. "Just a weekend. Me, Helen, the kids. You." There it was. The suggestion, hanging in the air between them like something fragile and unexpected. On the other end of the line, Barry could hear his father inhale slowly, then exhale. "Well," his father said, voice careful but warm, "that's not something I've been asked in a long time." Barry smiled despite himself. "Is that a yes or a polite no?" "It's a surprised yes," his father said. "If you're sure." "I'm sure." Another beat. "Then, I should tell you," his father added. "I've been seeing someone. Her name's Ruth." Barry blinked. He hadn't expected the tightness in his chest. He'd known, intellectually, that his father dated. The idea just hadn't felt real until now. "Oh," Barry said, recovering quickly. "That's great. She's lovely," his father said, a smile audible in his voice. "And if it's all right with you, I'd like her to come." Barry hesitated for half a second, long enough to register, not long enough to wound. "Of course," he said, and he meant it. Mostly. After they hung up, Barry stayed on the porch for a moment, staring out at the yard where his kids' abandoned bikes lay on their sides like casualties of a forgotten skirmish. When he went back inside, Helen was sitting at the table with her coffee, the kids temporarily appeased by the promise of a movie. "You made a face," she said. "That was either good news or very strange news." He said yes, Barry said. Helen's smile was immediate. "That's wonderful. He's bringing his girlfriend." Helen raised her eyebrows, then shrugged. "That's also wonderful. Or potentially awkward. But mostly wonderful." Barry laughed. "You're unreasonably calm about this." Helen reached for his hand. "Your dad is allowed to be happy, Barry." "I know," he said. "I just haven't really thought about him that way. As a man." Helen squeezed his fingers. "Get ready to." The kids, upon hearing the word camping, reacted precisely as Barry had predicted. "You mean no Wi-Fi?" his son asked, appalled. "And bugs?" his daughter added. "With legs." "Yes," Barry said. "And yes, this is a terrible idea," his son concluded. "You'll survive," Barry said. "People did it for centuries. People also died young," his son countered. Packing began with more optimism than organization. Barry overestimated how much equipment he owned and underestimated how many things children apparently required to exist outdoors. Helen handled logistics with quiet efficiency, making lists Barry promptly misplaced. On Thursday evening, Barry stopped by his mother's house to drop off a spare key she'd asked for weeks earlier. She was on the phone when he arrived, wine already poured though the sun was still up. "I'm taking Dad camping," Barry said when she hung up. She laughed a little too brightly. "Camping? That's ambitious. It's just a weekend." "With the kids?" she asked. "Yes." "And Helen?" "Yes." "And his girlfriend," Barry added, watching her face carefully. Her smile tightened. "Of course." Barry didn't argue. He kissed her cheek, accepted a container of leftovers he didn't need, and left before the conversation could drift into regret or revisionist history. The drive home felt lighter. Friday afternoon arrived with unexpected weather. Clear skies, a breeze that promised cooperation. Barry picked his father up at his apartment, the kids craning their necks to see him. "Grandpa!" his daughter shouted, launching herself forward with unrestrained enthusiasm. His father laughed, catching her easily. "Still a rocket," he said. Ruth arrived a moment later, carrying a small bag and a calm presence that filled the space without demanding it. She shook Barry's hand, hugged Helen, and knelt to greet the kids at eye level. "I hear you're experts," she said to them. "At what?" his son asked, suspicious. "At adventure," Ruth replied. That earned a reluctant smile. As they drove toward the campsite, Barry watched his father in the rearview mirror, laughing with the kids, relaxed in a way Barry hadn't seen before. Something in his chest loosened. He didn't know what the weekend would bring. He just knew he was glad he'd suggested it. The blank card remained on the kitchen counter at home, waiting. And for once, that felt like progress. Chapter 3. Packing expectations. By the time they reached the edge of the state park, Barry felt as if he'd already lived through the weekend once. Every possible version of it running in parallel in his head. The one where the kids complained nonstop. The one where his father felt like a guest instead of family. The one where something unspoken finally broke open in a way that couldn't be repaired with humor. Helen noticed his silence about 20 minutes into the drive. You're gripping the wheel like it owes you money, she said lightly. Barry loosened his hands. Just thinking. That's what people say when they're spiraling. He glanced at her, grateful for the calm way she named things without judgment. I want this to be good. It will be, she said. And even if it's awkward, awkward isn't fatal. From the back seat, his daughter leaned forward between the headrests. Is Grandpa sleeping in the woods? Yes, Barry said. Like a pioneer? More like a man with a very good sleeping bag, Helen said. His son snorted. We'll see. Barry caught his father's eye in the rearview mirror. His dad smiled, small and private, like someone enjoying a moment without needing to claim it. For his father, the invitation had landed like an unexpected inheritance. He'd said yes immediately, but the days leading up to it had been full of quiet inventory, of what to bring, what to say, what version of himself would be most useful. He worried about taking up space. He worried about saying the wrong thing. He worried that Barry might realize, too late, that this had been a sentimental mistake. Ruth noticed his restlessness as he folded and refolded the same shirt the night before. You're allowed to be excited, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I am, he said. I'm also cautious, she smiled. You raised a good man. He didn't invite you out of obligation. He nodded, absorbing that. At the campsite, expectations collided with logistics. The space was quieter than Barry had imagined. Tall trees, a wide clearing, the kind of stillness that made even small sounds feel intentional. The kids immediately claimed the picnic table. Helen surveyed the ground with an appraising eye. Okay, she said. Tense here, cooler there. Barry, you're on firewood duty. His son groaned. Why do we need firewood? It's not cold. It's camping, Barry said. Firewood is ceremonial. His daughter clapped. I like ceremonies. Ruth moved easily among them, offering help without hovering. She showed the kids how to unroll sleeping pads without turning them into weapons. She asked Barry's father where he wanted the lantern and listened to the answer like it mattered, which it did. Barry watched her from a distance, surprised by the absence of tension he'd expected to feel. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't auditioning for a role. She was just there. As they worked, Barry's mind drifted, not backward but sideways, to the version of himself he might have been if things had gone differently. If his father had been around more. If weekends hadn't been rationed. If presents hadn't felt like something you had to earn. He shook the thought away and focused on the tent poles in his hands. Dad, he said, can you hold this? His father stepped forward without hesitation, hands steady. Like this? Yeah, perfect. The word surprised Barry as he said it. Perfect. Not in the absolute sense, but in the moment it felt accurate. By late afternoon, the campsite had taken shape. Tents stood upright. A cooler hummed with promise. The kids explored the perimeter with exaggerated caution, reporting every fallen branch as a discovery. Helen sat on a folding chair, sipping water. This is nice, she said. Barry sat beside her. You sound surprised. I am, she admitted. In a good way. Ruth joined them, offering a bag of trail mix. Your kids are good at this, she said. They argue professionally, Barry replied. But they adapt. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, Barry felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not relief, not excitement, recognition. This awkward, imperfect, shared space was what he'd been missing. Not grand gestures, just time, uncompressed. His father sat across from him, helping his granddaughter whittle a stick with exaggerated seriousness. Barry watched the scene like someone afraid it might dissolve if he looked too closely. Dad, he said quietly. His father looked up. Yeah, I'm glad you came. His father smiled, the kind that carried years in it. Me too, Bear. As evening approached, the air cooled and expectations softened. Whatever this weekend became, it was already more than a card. And for the first time in a long while, Barry felt like they were all exactly where they were supposed to be. Chapter 4, First night, new light. The first fire took longer than Barry expected, mostly because everyone had an opinion about how it should be done. You need more air, his son said, crouched beside the pit like a junior consultant. You need patience, Barry replied, fanning the kindling with exaggerated care. Ruth watched from a few steps back, arms folded loosely, smiling like someone enjoying a familiar play performed by new actors. You're both right, she said. But you're missing the dramatic pause. His daughter perked up. There's a pause. Absolutely, Ruth said. The fire likes to know it's wanted. Barry's father laughed, low and easy. She's not wrong. Barry struck the match again. This time, the flame caught, climbed, then settled into a steady burn. The kids cheered as if they'd personally negotiated the outcome. Dinner was simple: hot dogs, fruit, something Helen had wrapped carefully in foil that tasted better than it had any right to. They sat on camp chairs in a loose circle, the firelight smoothing edges, softening expressions. Barry noticed how easily conversation flowed when no one was checking the time. So, his son said, pointing his stick dangerously close to the flames, "How did you two meet?" Barry froze, mid-bite. Ruth answered without hesitation. "At the library." His daughter's eyes widened. "Like in a movie? Like in the history section," Ruth said. "Which is less glamorous, but more accurate." Barry's father nodded. "She corrected me on a date." "I corrected him politely," Ruth said. "He was off by 20 years. "Details," his father replied. Helen smiled across the fire. "That sounds very on-brand for both of you." Barry studied his father as he spoke. How he listened when Ruth talked, how he didn't rush to fill silence. This version of him felt fuller somehow, like a story with more chapters than Barry had ever read. As night settled in, the kids grew quieter, the day catching up with them. Barry's daughter curled against Helen, eyelids drooping. "I like Ruth," she murmured, already halfway asleep. Ruth looked touched but didn't comment, as if she understood the weight of accepting praise from a child. Barry filed that away. When it was time for bed, the process unfolded with the expected chaos. Flashlights went missing. Shoes appeared in improbable places. Someone insisted they'd heard an owl plotting something. Barry zipped the kids into their sleeping bags, crouched low inside the tent, the nylon walls glowing faintly from the lantern outside. "Dad?" his son whispered. "Yeah, this isn't so bad." Barry smiled in the dark. High praise. Once the kids were settled, Barry stepped back out into the cool night air. The fire had burned down to embers, the campsite quiet except for the occasional crackle and the distant sounds of other campers settling in. His father stood by the fire pit, hands in his pockets, looking up at the stars. "Forgot how many there are," he said. Barry joined him. "City lights spoil you." They stood in silence for a moment. Not the careful silence from the phone call, but something easier. "Thank you for inviting me," his father said quietly. "I should have done it sooner," Barry replied. His father shook his head. "Sooner is a tricky word. Sometimes it only makes sense when it happens." Ruth emerged from her tent, wrapping a sweater around herself. "You two look serious," she said lightly. "We're admiring astronomy," Barry said. "Ah," she replied. "Very serious indeed." Helen appeared a moment later, carrying mugs. "Tea," she announced. "Because I am who I am." They sat together, for adults under an open sky, sipping something warm, the day settling into memory even as it ended. Ruth turned to Barry. "You did a good thing," she said. He blinked. "Inviting you?" She smiled. "Inviting him." Barry nodded, absorbing that. "I didn't realize how much I missed him, not just around, but really knowing him." Ruth's gaze softened. "We all want to be known." Later, when the campsite had gone quiet and the fire was fully out, Barry lay awake in his tent, listening to the small sounds of his family sleeping nearby. The zipper of the neighboring tent whispered as someone shifted. His father, he guessed. For the first time in years, Barry didn't feel like time was slipping past him unnoticed. It felt paused, intentional. Outside, the stars held their places. And for once, so did everyone else. Chapter 5. Fireside Truths. Morning arrived softly, filtered through pine needles and canvas, the light gentler than it ever seemed at home. Barry woke before the kids, before Helen, before the day could make demands. For a few moments, he lay still, listening to the campground breathe, zipper murmurs, distant footsteps, a bird with an opinion about dawn. He slipped out of the tent and found his father already awake, sitting on the picnic bench with a mug balanced between his hands. "You sleep?" Barry asked. "Eventually," his father said. "My brain needed to inventory everything first." Barry smiled. "Mine does that too." They sat in companionable quiet until Ruth emerged with another mug and a blanket draped over her shoulders. She handed Barry coffee without asking how he took it, which somehow felt both presumptuous and exactly right. "I come prepared," she said, catching his look. The kids burst out of the tent moments later, energy returning like a switched-on appliance. Breakfast became a cooperative effort. Burned toast, uneven pancakes, laughter when Barry dropped the spatula. Helen watched it all with a fond, observant calm. Later, with the kids occupied on a short trail with Ruth, Barry and his father lingered near the campsite. The quiet pressed in differently now, heavier with things that had been waiting. "You've done well," his father said, gesturing vaguely toward the path where the others had gone. Barry shrugged. "I try." His father hesitated, then said, "I used to worry I hadn't taught you enough." The admission landed carefully, like something fragile being set down. "You taught me a lot," Barry said, "even when you weren't there." His father winced, then nodded. That's the part one still. Dad, Barry said gently. I invited you here because I want you in my life, not to settle accounts. His father looked at him, eyes shining but steady. I know. I just still feel like I failed. Barry took a breath. The old reflex, to reassure, to smooth, rose up, but he let it pass. You didn't fail, he said. You were limited. His father laughed quietly. That's a kinder word. It's a more accurate one. That afternoon brought a mishap involving a loose tent stake and Barry's son's ankle. Not serious, but dramatic enough to require teamwork. Barry watched his father take charge calmly, efficiently, without theatrics. He delegated without barking, reassured without minimizing. Later, as the kids rested, Helen and Ruth sat together on folding chairs, sharing snacks and stories. Barry caught snippets, work frustrations, favorite books, mutual amusement at Barry's tendency to overthink. You married a thoughtful man, Ruth said. Helen smiled. Thoughtful is the polite version. That evening they built another fire. This one came easier. As the flames settled, conversation deepened naturally, drawn by the intimacy of the dark. So, Helen said, stretching her legs toward the warmth, Barry tells me you feel guilty about the divorce. His father stared into the fire. I do. Ruth reached for his hand but didn't interrupt. I keep thinking, he continued, if I'd been more attentive, more decisive, less agreeable. Barry listened, resisting the urge to interrupt. I thought love was about not rocking the boat, his father said. Turns out, sometimes the boat needs rocking. Barry nodded slowly. That's something I worry about. Being steady enough that I forget to be present. Helen glanced at him. You're present. I try, Barry said. But I'm also afraid. Of failing. Of being taken for granted. Of waking up and finding out I wasn't enough. Ruth spoke then, her voice calm but firm. Happiness isn't something you owe someone by becoming smaller. Barry absorbed that. His father nodded. That's what I didn't understand. I thought love meant sacrifice without limit. But love also means showing up as yourself. They sat with that, the fire crackling like punctuation. Later, when the kids had drifted toward sleep again, Barry lingered by the dying embers with his father. I don't blame you, Barry said quietly, for the divorce. His father closed his eyes briefly. Thank you. I blame the situation, Barry continued, and maybe the idea that happiness is always somewhere else. His father smiled, sad and relieved all at once. I'm glad you're thinking about these things. It means you care. I care, Barry said. About my marriage. About my kids. About you. The words felt solid, earned. As the fire went out and the night reclaimed its quiet, Barry felt something shift. Not resolved, not finished, but acknowledged. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Chapter 6. The weather turns. The weather changed its mind sometime after lunch. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just a shift in the air. A breeze that lost its warmth. A sky that went from confidently blue to undecided gray. Barry noticed it the way you notice someone fall quiet in the middle of a conversation. We should probably secure the tents, Helen said, scanning the tree line. Barry nodded. After we finish this trail. They were halfway down a loop the park map described optimistically as leisurely when the first drops fell. His daughter squealed, delighted. His son squinted upward, calculating risk. It's fine, Barry said. Just rain. The rain disagreed. Within minutes, it was coming down hard enough to soak through shirts and flatten hair. Ruth laughed, genuinely, and pulled her hood up. Barry's father reached automatically for his granddaughter's hand, steadying her on the slick path. The moment crystallized quickly. One wrong step, a startled yelp, Barry's son sliding sideways and landing hard on the damp ground. I'm fine, the boy insisted immediately, which was how Barry knew he wasn't. Barry was there in seconds, crouching, heart spiking. Where does it hurt? My pride, his son said, then winced. Okay, my ankle. A little. Barry's father knelt beside them, calm as a practiced hand. Let's not rush, he said. See if you can stand. The boy tried, failed, and sat back down with a huff of frustration. Rain soaked them all now. Barry felt his own panic rise. Images of emergency rooms, ruined weekends, blame. Okay, his father said evenly. Plan B. He directed Ruth to hand over a poncho, had Helen check for swelling, talked the boy through breathing until the initial shock passed. Barry found himself following instructions without questioning them. Can you put weight on it? His father asked. Sort of. Good. Then we go slow. They made it back to the campsite damp, muddy, and laughing despite themselves. The injury turned out to be a mild sprain, enough to justify sympathy, not enough to end the trip. Barry watched his father move through the moment. Not as a guest, not as someone trying to impress, but as a man who had done this before, who knew how to be useful without becoming loud. Later, as the rain eased into a mist and the kids rested under blankets, Helen and Ruth stood beneath the tarp, sharing the last of the trail mix. You handled that well, Helen said to Ruth. Ruth shrugged. I've learned that calm travels faster than panic. Helen smiled. That should be printed somewhere. Barry joined them, shaking water from his sleeves. I forgot how much teamwork helps, he said. Ruth met his eyes. You didn't forget. You just hadn't needed it like this in a while. That afternoon became slower by necessity. Books came out. Stories were told. Barry's father read aloud with voices just exaggerated enough to amuse without condescension. Barry sat nearby, listening, struck by the quiet competence of it all. When the sky finally cleared, it felt earned. That evening, as they rebuilt the fire with damp wood and shared jokes about their soggy heroics, Barry realized something had shifted again. Not just between him and his father, but in how he understood strength. Not stubbornness, not silence, presence. As the fire caught and the night settled in once more, Barry felt a deep, steady gratitude. For the mess, for the weather, for the way things only reveal themselves when they don't go as planned. And this time, he didn't wish it had been different. Chapter 7. Morning after. The last morning arrived without ceremony. No birds announced it. No sunlight staged an entrance. Just the soft gray of early light and the sound of someone zipping a tent with unnecessary caution. Barry woke to that sound and lay still, listening. The kids were asleep, breathing evenly. Helen shifted beside him, then settled again. The quiet felt earned, like the end of a long conversation where everything important had finally been said, or at least named. He eased out of the tent and found his father sitting on the cooler, lacing his boots. Morning, Barry said. Morning, his father replied. Didn't mean to wake anyone. You didn't, Barry said, though that wasn't strictly true. He poured coffee from the thermos Ruth had insisted on bringing, the steam rising between them. They stood for a moment, each facing the trees, the campsite still holding its breath. I always liked this hour, his father said. Before the day decides what it wants. Barry nodded. Feels honest. His father glanced at him, then looked back out. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said last night. Barry waited. I spent a long time believing I wasn't strong enough, his father continued. That if I'd pushed harder, demanded more, your mother would have stayed. That it was my job to make her happy. Barry felt the familiar urge to interrupt, to reassure, to redirect, but he stayed quiet. But I see you now, his father said, voice steady. And I realize something. Love isn't about preventing someone from leaving. It's about showing up fully while you're there. Barry swallowed. That's what I'm trying to do. I know, his father said. And I'm proud of you. The words landed with surprising weight. Barry hadn't realized how much he'd been waiting to hear them. Not as a child, not as reassurance, but as recognition from one adult to another. They heard footsteps behind them. Ruth approached, carrying 2 folded camp chairs like an offering. I didn't want to interrupt, she said, setting them down. But I also didn't want to miss the quiet. Helen appeared a moment later, hair pulled back, eyes still soft with sleep. She nodded to Barry's father, then sat beside Barry without comment, close enough to share warmth. The kids emerged last, groggy but cheerful, already negotiating who would pack what. As breakfast unfolded, simpler this time, more efficient, Barry noticed the ease among them. No one performing, no one bracing, just shared motion toward an ending. When the campsite was nearly dismantled, Barry's father lingered by the fire pit, staring down at the blackened stones. I used to think endings meant failure, he said quietly. Now I think they just mean honesty caught up. Barry considered that. Some things end because they're wrong, he said. Some end because they've done what they could. His father smiled. You've been thinking. I had good teachers, Barry said. They loaded the cars in companionable silence. The kids climbed in, tired but content. Ruth checked that nothing was left behind, then nodded once, satisfied. Before getting into his own car, Barry's father stopped him. I want you to know, he said. I never stopped wanting more time with you. I just didn't always know how to ask. Barry felt something loosen in his chest. You don't have to ask now, he said. You're already here. His father laughed softly. I like that answer. The drive home was quieter than the drive out. The kids slept. Helen rested her hand on Barry's arm, fingers warm and familiar. Barry watched the road unspool ahead of them, feeling, oddly, both older and steadier. When they reached town, the familiar streets felt slightly altered, like a place revisited after a long absence. They said goodbye in the driveway. Hugs lingered. Ruth squeezed Barry's shoulder. Thank you, she said simply. For coming, Barry replied. For seeing him, she corrected gently. After they left, Barry stood for a moment, keys in hand, watching the taillights disappear. Inside, the house greeted them with its usual clutter and comfort. Shoes piled by the door, a forgotten drawing taped to the fridge. Life waiting. As they unpacked, Barry noticed the Father's Day card still on the counter where he'd left it days ago. He picked it up, opened it, and smiled. This time he knew exactly what to write. Chapter 8. Coming home different. The house felt louder than Barry remembered it. Not because the kids were making noise, they were unusually subdued, still wrapped in the pleasant exhaustion that follows fresh air and novelty, but because home had a way of amplifying thoughts. The refrigerator hummed with authority. The clock in the hallway ticked like it had opinions. Even the floorboards sounded mildly judgmental as Barry carried bags down the hall. Helen set the cooler on the counter and leaned against it, watching him. "You're doing that thing," she said. "What thing?" "The quiet inventory," she replied. "Where you pretend you're unpacking objects, but you're really unpacking yourself." Barry smiled, a little sheepish. "Was it that obvious?" "To me," Helen said. "It usually is." The kids drifted into their rooms, announcing discoveries as if they'd been gone for months instead of a weekend. "My pillow smells weird," his son declared. "That's nature," Barry said. "It builds character." "I don't want character," his daughter said. "I want my blanket." Life resumed its usual shape quickly, but something about it felt adjustable. Barry noticed himself kneeling to help his son with the ankle brace without rushing. He noticed himself listening, really listening, when his daughter explained why her stuffed rabbit had been offended by the tent arrangement. That evening, his mother called. "I heard you went camping," she said, voice bright with practiced casualness. "We did," Barry replied. "With your father," she added. "Yes." Pause. Then, "How was that?" Barry leaned against the counter, considering how to answer. The old instinct to reassure, to minimize, to keep the peace rose up automatically. He let it pass. "It was good," he said. "Important." Another pause, sharper this time. "Well," she said, "I hope you didn't all freeze." "No," Barry said gently. "We were fine." They talked a bit longer, about the kids, about weather, about nothing that needed solving. When they hung up, Barry felt oddly calm. Not defensive, not resolved, just clear. Later, after the kids were asleep, Barry found the Father's Day card again. He sat at the table where it had waited all weekend, pen in hand. This time, the words came without effort. "Dad, thank you for showing up, then and now. I'm grateful for who you are, not just what you did. I'm glad we're still learning each other." He closed the card and slipped it into an envelope. Helen watched him from the doorway. "That looks like closure," she said. "It's not closure," Barry replied. "It's continuity." She smiled. "I like that better." Father's Day arrived quietly. No fanfare. Pancakes with uneven edges. A handmade card from his daughter featuring a stick figure with suspiciously heroic proportions. A thoughtful note from his son acknowledging Barry's consistent effort, which felt like a high compliment. Barry drove over to his father's place mid-morning. Ruth answered the door, smiling. "He's in the kitchen," she said, "arguing with the toaster." Barry laughed and stepped inside. His father looked up, surprised and pleased. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Barry said, handing him the card. His father read it slowly, then looked up, eyes bright. "Thank you," he said simply. They hugged, awkwardly, briefly, honestly. As Barry drove home afterward, the streets looked the same. The day unfolded like any other. But inside him, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not permanently fixed, but aligned. Fathers weren't expendable. Time wasn't owed. Presence was chosen. And Barry intended to keep choosing it. Chapter 9. Father's Day. Father's Day did not arrive with revelation. It arrived with sunlight through the blinds, the smell of coffee, and Barry's daughter climbing onto his chest like she'd been practicing the maneuver all night. "Happy Father's Day," she announced, face inches from his. "You may now wake up." Barry laughed, groggy and warm. "Thank you for your mercy." His son hovered in the doorway, holding a card with the careful seriousness of someone presenting a thesis. "Mom says we're supposed to wait until pancakes," he said. "But I disagree." Barry sat up, accepting the card. It was folded too many times and clearly revised mid-thought. "Dad," it read, "you're not perfect, but you try consistently. That matters. Also, you came camping even though you don't like bugs." Barry swallowed past the unexpected tightness in his throat. "This," he said, "is a very strong endorsement." His son nodded. "I worked hard on the wording." Downstairs, Helen moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, humming to herself, the griddle already warm. She wore an old t-shirt of Barry's, sleeves pushed up, hair loose. She looked like home. Pancakes arrived uneven and generous. His daughter insisted on adding berries in what she called an artistic pattern, which looked suspiciously like chaos. They ate slowly, unhurried, the morning stretching itself out. "This is my favorite kind of holiday," Helen said. "No schedule, no expectations." Barry smiled. "Just presence." She met his eyes, knowing exactly what he meant. Later, Barry drove to his father's place alone, the card he'd written tucked carefully in the glove compartment. The streets were quiet, families in mid-celebration, the town softened by shared ritual. His father answered the door before Barry knocked, as if he'd been waiting right there. "Happy Father's Day," Barry said. His father smiled, wide and genuine. "To you too." They sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight slanting across the worn surface. Barry handed over the card. His father read it slowly, lips pressing together at the corners. "I don't think I ever knew how much I wanted to hear that," his father said quietly. Barry nodded. "I didn't know how much I needed to say it." Ruth appeared with coffee, set the mugs down, and gave them both a look that held affection without intrusion. "I'll give you a minute," she said, retreating to the other room. They talked not about the past exactly but around it. About books, about the kids, about small plans that hinted at future ones. "I was thinking," Barry said, standing to leave, "maybe we could make this a thing, not camping every time. Just time." His father smiled, something like relief settling into his features. "I'd like that." When Barry got home, the kids were sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by toys and half-finished projects. Helen looked up from the couch. "How was it?" she asked. "Good," Barry said. "Quietly good." He sat down among them, letting the normal noise wash over him. He didn't feel fixed. He didn't feel finished. He felt present. That evening, after the kids were asleep and the house settled into its familiar hush, Barry stood at the window for a moment, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. He thought about his father, about absence, about effort, about the long work of showing up even when the structure doesn't make it easy. He thought about his children, about what they would remember. Not perfection, not grand gestures, but consistency. Barry turned off the light and went upstairs, the day complete not because it had been extraordinary, but because it had been chosen. And that, he understood now, was love's quiet comedy. Not the dramatic rescue, not the sudden revelation, but the decision made again and again to stay.